The summons came via text from my mother. Family meeting, 7 p.m., upstairs. In my family, family meeting is code for an ambush. It's never about celebrating good news. It's about cornering one person until they break. For the last decade, that person has usually been me. My name is Nicole. I'm 29, and for the past 7 years, I've lived in the basement of my parents' house. It's not as pathetic as it sounds. It's a fully finished apartment with its own entrance, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that doesn't have my dad's beard trimmings all over the sink. It's quiet, it's stable, and it allowed me to build a life for myself without anyone looking over my shoulder. Or so I thought. I trudged upstairs at 7:02 p.m., deliberately 2 minutes late. They were all there, arranged on the living room furniture like a jury. My mom, Linda, sat ramrod straight on the floral sofa. My dad, Harvey, was sunk into his recliner, his eyes fixed on the blank TV screen. And on the love seat, holding hands like they were posing for a wedding announcement, were my brother Dale and his new wife, Angelina. "Nicole, you're late," my mom said, her voice tight. She's 59, but carries herself with the rigid certainty of a woman who has never once been wrong. "Sorry, work call," I lied, taking the only empty seat, an uncomfortable wooden dining chair they dragged in for me. My brother Dale, 32, and glowing with the unearned confidence of a man who's never faced a real consequence, gave me a patronizing smile. "No worries, Nikki. This won't take long." Beside him, Angelina, a pristine 28-year-old who looked like she was assembled from an Instagram filter, gave a little wave. Her diamond ring caught the light and flashed aggressively. "We have some really exciting news," she chirped. I waited. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. My dad cleared his throat but said nothing. He's 63 and has spent the last 40 years perfecting the art of being a passive observer in his own life. Finally, my mom folded her hands in her lap. Dale and Angelina are ready to start their life together properly. They need a space to save up for their own house, and since this is the family home... She trailed off, looking at me expectantly. I just stared back. "Okay, and?" Dale leaned forward, his smile widening. "And we need the basement, Nick. It's the perfect starter space for us." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. I looked from Dale's smug face to Angelina's perfectly neutral mask, then to my mother's hard, determined expression. I glanced at my dad, who was now intently studying a loose thread on the arm of his chair. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You want me to move out?" I asked, my voice flat. "It's time you stood on your own 2 feet, honey," my mom said, delivering the line she'd clearly been rehearsing. "You're 29. This will be a good push for you." "A push?" "They were calling it a push," Angelina chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We know it's sudden, but we just can't afford a place of our own right now, not with the wedding expenses. We'd be so grateful." I felt a cold, dark rage begin to uncoil in my stomach. It was an old, familiar feeling, but this time it was different, sharper. I could feel it honing itself into a fine point. For years, I had swallowed the little injustices, the casual dismissals, the constant reminders that Dale was the sun and I was just a planet caught in his orbit. But this was no small thing. This was my home. "How long do I have?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Dale glanced at Angelina, then back at me. "Well, our lease is up at the end of the month, so... a week?" "That should be enough time to pack up your things, right?" "A week? 7 days to dismantle 7 years of my life so the golden child and his bride could play house." I looked at each of them, one by one. I saw the entitlement in Dale's eyes, the condescending pity in Angelina's, the righteous justification in my mother's, and the gutless shame in my father's. They all expected me to cry, to argue, to throw a tantrum. They were prepared for a fight, so I gave them nothing. I stood up from the hard wooden chair. Okay, I said. The room went quiet. They were stunned by my easy compliance. Dale's smirk faltered for a second. Okay, my mom repeated, suspicious. Yes, okay, I'll be out in a week. I turned and walked out of the living room, down the stairs, and into my basement apartment. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and let out a single, silent breath. The rage wasn't hot anymore. It was ice cold and perfectly clear. They thought they were pushing me out. They thought I was a charity case, living off their generosity. They had no idea that the $1-800 a month I transferred to my father's bank account wasn't rent. It was 80% of their mortgage payment, plus utilities. They had no idea I'd been planning my exit for the last 2 years, just waiting for the right moment. And they just handed it to me on a silver platter. The first 24 hours were a blur of cold, methodical fury. I didn't sleep. Instead, I started packing, but not in the frantic, tear-stained way they probably imagined. Every box I taped up was a small act of rebellion. My family has always operated on a system of plausible deniability. They'd chip away at you with 1,000 tiny cuts, then act shocked when you bled. I remembered being 16 and saving up for months for a new laptop for school. The day I bought it, Dale's ancient one mysteriously died, and my mom suggested I let him use mine just for a little while so his grades wouldn't suffer. He returned it 6 months later with a cracked screen and a sticky keyboard. When I got upset, I was the selfish one. It's just a thing, Nicole, my mom had sighed. Family is more important. That was their mantra. Family is more important. It was the excuse they used to justify every imbalance, every time I was expected to shrink so Dale could shine. As I sorted through my desk, I didn't just pack, I documented. I found the receipt for the water heater I'd paid to replace 2 years ago when theirs burst and flooded my bathroom. They'd promised to pay me back. They never did. I took a photo of the receipt and uploaded it to a secure cloud folder. I did the same with the invoice for the new circuit breaker panel I'd covered last winter, and the property tax bill from the year my dad was laid off, which I'd paid in full. My rent was just the beginning. I was their emergency fund, their safety net, and they didn't even have the decency to see it. Upstairs, I could hear them. My mother's high, tinkling laugh, Angelina's performative giggles. They were probably celebrating their victory, toasting to the brilliant plan that finally got the freeloader out of the basement. The sound didn't hurt me anymore. It was just noise, fuel. By noon the next day, I had 3 neat stacks of boxes and a digital folder overflowing with evidence. I took a break, sat on my packed-up sofa, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled past my mom's text. Hope the packing is going well. Let me know if you need boxes. And dialed Madison. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, you've been quiet. Everything okay? Madison is my best friend. Has been since we were kids building forts in the woods behind this very house. She's the only one who knows the full, unedited version of my family. She's also a shark of a real estate agent. I need a favor, I said, my voice steady. A big one. And it needs to happen fast. I live for big, fast favors. What's up? My family is kicking me out. They gave me a week. There was a pause, then a low curse. Are you kidding me? After everything you know what? Never mind. I'm not surprised. What do you need? I need you to help me buy a house, I said. Okay, we can do that. I can start sending you listings right. No, I interrupted. I know which house I want to buy. This one. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then a slow, wicked laugh started to build. Oh, Nicole, you're my absolute favorite person. Tell me everything. An hour later, the wheels were in motion. Madison was drawing up the paperwork. The next call was harder. I had to pull the trigger on a plan I'd only ever seen as a distant fantasy. I dialed the direct line for my financial advisor, Martin Phillips. His assistant answered, but when I gave my name, she put me straight through. Nicole, to what do I owe the pleasure? Martin's voice was warm and familiar. He's a sharp, no-nonsense man of 42 who started managing my meager savings when I was 19 and landed my first real job. He never treated me like a kid, and he never questioned why I was so determined to build a firewall between my money and my family. Hi, Martin. I have a situation. I need to liquidate some assets and move a significant amount of capital, as in, by the end of the week. He didn't even hesitate. All right. How much are we talking? And is everything okay? Everything is about to be, I said. Can I come in this afternoon? My 2 o'clock just canceled. The office is yours. When I walked into his sleek downtown office a few hours later, he greeted me with a handshake and a kind smile. He led me back to his conference room, a file already laid out on the polished table. I ran the numbers after you called, he said, tapping a page. Your portfolio is performing 17% above projections. Your credit score is immaculate. Whatever you're planning, Nicole, you're in a very strong position to do it. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You've been smart, patient. I'm proud of you. Hearing those words from him, a practical stranger compared to my family, almost broke me. But I held it together. This wasn't the time to fall apart. This was the time to build. That night, after 3 days of relentless packing, I couldn't sleep. The basement felt foreign, filled with the ghosts of boxes and empty shelves. Around 2 a.m., I crept upstairs. The house was dark and silent, breathing around me. I walked through the living room, my fingers tracing the back of the plush sofa. I'd paid for it. It was a housewarming gift to my parents 5 years ago, a replacement for the lumpy, torn one they'd had since the 90s. At the time, my mom had gushed, "Oh, Nicole, you shouldn't have." Now, I'm sure she saw it as just another piece of her furniture. I moved into the dining room, the solid oak table and chairs, a Christmas present from me after Dale had drunkenly broken one of the old chairs during a holiday party, the new smart TV in my dad's recliner zone, my birthday gift to him last year. I had slowly, quietly upgraded their lives, piece by piece, while they told their friends I was the struggling artist type who just couldn't seem to get it together. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The next afternoon, I met Madison at a coffee shop halfway between my house and her office. She slid a thick folder across the table, her expression a perfect blend of professional calm and personal glee. "Here it is," she said, "the purchase agreement. I incorporated the LLC for you this morning, Benson Properties. A little on the nose, but I figured you'd appreciate it." I smiled. The first genuine one in days. I love it. The offer is all cash, well over asking, with a 7-day close and no contingencies. In this market, no seller in their right mind would refuse it, especially not a seller who is financially over-leveraged and has no idea it's coming. She had pulled their mortgage information. They'd refinanced twice, and their interest rate was ugly. They were more vulnerable than I ever realized. I took a deep breath and signed the documents, my hands surprisingly steady. The largest financial transaction of my life, and it felt as natural as breathing. I was taking back what was mine. I was sealing the envelope when my phone buzzed. A text from Dale. "Angie and I are swinging by in a bit to take some measurements. Hope that's cool." It wasn't a question. It was a notification. An hour later, they let themselves in, not even bothering to knock on my basement door. Angelina waltzed in with a tape measure and a binder full of paint swatches. "Don't mind us," she sang, already measuring the wall where my bed used to be. I'm thinking a nice, calming sage green for this wall. It'll be our little sanctuary. Dale stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, a proprietary look on his face. We're thinking of ripping out this carpet, too. Putting in some of that nice vinyl plank. It'll really open the place up. I just leaned against a stack of boxes, sipping a bottle of water, and watched them redesign my home right in front of me. I offered nothing. No small talk, no resistance. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than an argument would have. "So, found a place yet?" Dale asked, trying to sound casual. "Looking at a few options," I said vaguely. Angelina paused her measuring. "You should try the apartments over on Mill Street. They're cozy. Probably right in your price range." The unspoken insult hung in the air. Cheap, small, and pathetic. Just like me. "Thanks for the tip," I said, my voice a flat line. "I'll check them out." As they were leaving, my dad appeared at the top of the stairs. He'd heard the commotion. He watched Dale and Angelina walk past him. Then his eyes met mine. For a split second, I saw it again. A flicker of something that looked an awful lot like guilt. He knew on some level that this was wrong, but he said nothing. He just turned and disappeared back into the kitchen. That flicker was all I would ever get from him, and it was nowhere near enough. Later that evening, I went upstairs to use the main printer. I needed hard copies of all my documents. The house was empty. My parents were out at their weekly bridge game. As I waited for the pages to print, I noticed the filing cabinet in the corner of the office was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. I knew my mom kept everything, meticulously organized. I pulled open the top drawer, labeled Finances. Inside, there were folders for mortgage, utilities, taxes. And then I saw it. Tucked in the back, a thick, worn manila folder with a single word written on the tab in my mother's neat cursive, Dale. My heart started to pound. I hesitated for only a moment before pulling it out. I opened the flap, and my breath caught in my throat. It was stuffed with statements, bank statements, credit card bills, student loan notices, all of them years old, all of them paid in full. A slow, cold smirk spread across my face. This was better than I could have ever imagined. I took the folder down to my basement, my hands shaking slightly. Under the harsh fluorescent light of my half-dismantled kitchen, I spread the contents across the floor. It was a decade of my brother's financial irresponsibility, meticulously documented and paid for by my parents. There were student loan statements from the private university he'd attended, the one I was told we couldn't afford. Monthly payments of over $600, made from my parents' joint checking account for 8 straight years. There were credit card bills littered with charges for expensive dinners, weekend trips, and designer clothes, all racking up interest until a check from Linda and Harvey Benson swooped in to clear the balance. They had even paid for his honeymoon to Hawaii, a $5,000 charge on their visa from 3 months ago. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. While I was carefully budgeting every dollar, paying my rent on time, and secretly covering their asses when they fell short, they were bankrolling his entire adult life. The narrative they'd spun for me, that I needed to be responsible, to pull my own weight, to stand on my own 2 feet, was a complete and utter lie. It was a story crafted for an audience of one. Me. Dale was never expected to stand on his own feet. He was carried on their shoulders. My anger wasn't hot and explosive anymore. It had cooled into something dense and heavy, like a block of steel in my gut. I spent the next 2 hours scanning every single page into my laptop, creating a digital archive of their hypocrisy. The receipts didn't lie. The numbers told a story far more damning than any accusation I could ever make. When I was done, I slipped the original documents back into the folder and returned it to the filing cabinet, leaving no trace of my discovery. For the next 2 days, I leaned into the role they'd cast for me. I played the part of the panicked, desperate daughter. I let my mother overhear me on the phone with a fictitious landlord, begging for a break on a security deposit. "I'm sorry, I just don't have it all right now," I'd said, my voice cracking with fake desperation. "Can I pay it in installments?" From the corner of my eye, I saw her listening from the hallway, a smug, satisfied look on her face. This was what she wanted, proof that I couldn't make it without them, that their push was a necessary act of tough love. I let Dale see me scrolling through listings for dingy, overpriced studio apartments. "Tough market out there, huh?" he'd said, peering over my shoulder at a picture of a kitchen with brown linoleum and a rust-stained sink. "Guess you should have saved up more." "Guess so," I'd mumbled, playing defeated. Inside, I was a coiled spring. Every condescending comment, every pitying glance, was just another turn of the screw. They had no idea they were arming me. On Friday, with just 2 days left before my eviction, I got a message that threw me for a loop. It was a DM on Instagram from a name I vaguely recognized, Cameron Warner. His profile picture showed a handsome guy with a friendly smile, standing on a boat. The message was short and to the point. "Hey, this is kind of random, but I think we have a mutual acquaintance. Angelina Taylor. I'm her ex. I saw on her profile that she married your brother. If you have a minute, I think there are some things you should know." My first instinct was to ignore it. What could some random ex-boyfriend possibly have to say that would matter? But my curiosity, now honed to a razor's edge, wouldn't let it go. Angelina was a little too perfect, her story a little too polished. There had to be a crack in the facade somewhere. I typed back a simple reply. "I can meet for coffee tomorrow morning." He responded almost immediately with the name of a cafe downtown. This felt different, messier. The financial documents were clean, undeniable proof. Whatever this was, it felt like wading into drama I didn't need. But my family had made this personal. They had reduced my life to a logistical problem to be solved for their own convenience. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. And that meant knowing all the players on the board and all the secrets they were hiding. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively trendy places with exposed brick and Edison bulbs. Cameron Warner was already there, sitting at a small table in the back. He was 26, younger than Angelina, and had a restless energy about him. He looked less like a man out for revenge and more like someone genuinely bewildered by how things had turned out. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I know this is weird." "It is," I agreed. "So, what is it I should know?" He took a nervous sip of his coffee. "Look, Angie, she's a planner. She always has a goal, and she does whatever it takes to get there. We were together for 3 years. We were talking about getting married." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. The screen showed a photo of him and Angelina, smiling on a beach. The date stamp was from late April. She'd gotten engaged to my brother in early June. "We broke up 2 weeks before she announced her engagement to Dale," he continued, his voice tight with the hurt that was still fresh. "She told me she needed to find herself. Turns out, she'd already found my replacement." That was slimy, but not exactly a bombshell. Social climbers climb. It's what they do. I must have looked unimpressed because he leaned in closer. "That's not the real reason I called you," he said, lowering his voice. "About a year ago, Angie got really into crypto. She convinced me to put some money in, and I did okay. Then she started talking about this family business she wanted to start, a boutique marketing firm. She needed seed money. She convinced Dale to sell off a big chunk of his crypto portfolio, I think it was around $30,000, to fund it. I raised an eyebrow. I've never heard of any family business. Cameron let out a bitter laugh. That's because it never existed. The day after the money hit her personal account, the business was dead. She told Dale the market was too volatile and that they should just use the money for their future, for their wedding. She basically tricked him into paying for his own engagement ring. Now that was interesting. It was a level of cold, calculated manipulation that even my brother didn't deserve. Do you have any proof of this? I asked. He nodded, scrolling through his phone again. He showed me screenshots of texts between him and Angelina where she'd bragged about her plan. He's so trusting. It's almost cute. One of her messages read, "This wedding is going to be epic." She's a shark, Cameron said, finally looking up at me. And your brother is swimming in her tank. I just figured you had a right to know what kind of person was joining your family. I pulled out my own phone. Can you send me those? He hesitated for a second, then nodded. Yeah. Okay. As the images loaded on my screen, I hit the record button on my voice memo app, which I'd opened before I sat down. Just for my own clarity, I said calmly, can you state your name and confirm that you're sending me these screenshots of your own free will? He looked a little startled, but complied. I now had a recorded statement and dated evidence. Fallout insurance. I had no intention of using it, not yet. But I learned my lesson about coming to a fight unarmed. That afternoon, my mother insisted on taking me to lunch, a transparent attempt to manage her guilt. We sat at a sterile chain restaurant, the kind she loves. So, she said, stirring her iced tea, have you found a place? Your father and I are worried about you. I think so, I lied smoothly. It's a studio over on Mill Street. The landlord seems a little sketchy, and the plumbing makes a weird noise, but it's what I can afford. I let my shoulders slump, putting on my best impression of a beaten dog. She didn't offer help. She didn't offer sympathy. She just nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Well, a little struggle is good for character development. It'll be good for you. The waitress brought our salads. As I picked at my lettuce, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dale. A picture of a plush, silver gray carpet sample. The caption read, "New carpet for the basement. What do you think? Getting it installed the day after you move out." I looked from the picture of the expensive carpet to my mother's self-satisfied face. They were literally planning to recarpet the ground I was being kicked out of before my footprints were even cold. I typed back a one-word reply, nice. When I got home, there was a package tucked behind the bushes near my basement door. It was from Madison. I opened it in my car. Inside was a heavy-duty plastic stake and a sign neatly wrapped in plastic. It was a standard real estate sign, red and white and bold. In huge letters, it read, "Sold, moving day, the final day, the 1-week deadline." I was up before the sun. I'd hired a small moving crew, 2 guys and a truck, and they arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. They were efficient and professional, clearing out my entire basement apartment in under 2 hours. Every box, every piece of furniture, every trace of the life I had built within those 4 walls was loaded onto the truck. I didn't tell them where I was going, just that my things were going into a storage unit for now. It was a cleaner lie. By 8:30 a.m., the truck was gone and the basement was empty. Eerily so. It was just a space now, stripped of any personality. It looked bigger and sadder than I remembered. I did a final sweep, picking up a stray rubber band and a dust bunny from under the radiator. Then I walked out, locking the door behind me for the last time. I spent the next hour at a nearby park, sipping a coffee and watching the clock. Madison texted me at 9:45. "It's done. The sale officially recorded with the county 10 minutes ago. Congratulations, homeowner." A wave of something, relief, terror, vindication, washed over me. It was real. I owned it. At 10:15, I drove back and parked down the street, waiting. I saw Dale's car pull into the driveway right at 10:30, followed closely by my parents' sedan. Dale and Angelina got out, beaming, and started unloading boxes from their trunk. My parents got out to supervise, my mother already directing traffic. No, put that one by the door, Dale. That has the kitchen things. This was my cue. I got out of my car, walked to the trunk, and pulled out the sign Madison had given me. It was heavier than it looked. I walked calmly up the driveway, past my family who were too busy arranging boxes to notice me at first. I found a soft patch of grass on the front lawn, right next to the prize-winning rose bushes my mother was so proud of. I positioned the stake, lifted my foot, and drove it deep into the earth with a satisfying thump. The sold sign stood tall and defiant. It took them a moment. Dale was the first to see it. He stopped, a box labeled bathroom halfway to the ground. What the hell is that? He asked, pointing. My mother and Angelina turned. My dad, who had been quietly observing from the porch, went still. They all stared at the sign as if it were a venomous snake that had just appeared on their lawn. What is going on, Nicole? My mother demanded, her voice sharp with confusion and annoyance. Right on schedule, Madison's sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. She got out, dressed in a sharp blazer and heels, radiating professional authority. She walked right up to me, a huge smile on her face, and ignored everyone else completely. Nicole, congratulations, she said, her voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. She pulled a set of keys from her pocket, the keys to the front door, the back door, the garage, and pressed them into my hand. It's all yours. Welcome home. The silence that followed was absolute. My family stood frozen, a tableau of disbelief. Dale's mouth was hanging open. Angelina's perfectly applied lipstick was stretched into a thin, ugly line. My mother's face was a storm cloud of warring emotions. Yours? Dale finally sputtered, looking from me to the sign and back again. What does she mean, it's yours? I turned to face them, the keys feeling solid and real in my palm. The rage I'd been holding on to all week was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling calm. It means I bought the house, I said, my voice even. The sale closed this morning. My mother took a step forward. That's not possible. You can't. We would never sell it to you. You didn't sell it to me, I corrected her gently. You sold it to a private real estate investment company called Benson Properties, LLC, an all-cash offer, 20% over asking. I believe you and Dad signed the papers on Thursday. My dad sank onto the porch steps, his face pale. He knew. He had signed, and he hadn't said a word. Dale just shook his head, laughing a humorless, broken sound. This is a joke. This has to be a joke. I looked at the box of bathroom supplies in his hands, then at the open door to my old basement apartment. It's no joke, I said. I let a small, tight smile touch my lips. But you're welcome to apply to rent the basement. The rate has gone up, of course. Then I turned my back on them, walked up the front steps, and unlocked the door to my new house, leaving my stunned, speechless family standing on the lawn. I didn't get to enjoy the silence for long. The front door hadn't even clicked shut behind me before the shouting started. It was my mother's voice, high and furious, followed by the heavy thud of her fist against the wood. Nicole Marie Benson, you open this door right now. You don't get to do this to your family. I leaned against the door, taking a deep, steadying breath. I could hear Dale yelling in the background, a string of curses aimed at me, at Madison, at the sold sign. Angelina was making frantic shushing noises, more concerned with what the neighbors would think than the implosion of her new family. Through it all, my father was silent. I waited a full minute, letting them burn off the initial shock. Then I opened the door. They were all clustered on the porch, my mother's face red with fury. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could you be so deceitful? So cruel." "Cruel?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Was it cruel when you gave me 1 week to get out of my home? Or was that just a good push? "That was different," Dale shouted, stepping forward. "We're family." "You don't pull this kind of crap on family." "You seem to have a very flexible definition of what you can and can't do to family," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It seems to depend entirely on which family member you are." "We gave you a place to live for 7 years," my mother cried, shifting to her favorite tactic, guilt. "We supported you, and this is how you repay us? By making your own parents homeless?" This was the moment, the one I had been waiting for. I held up a hand. "Let's be very clear about something. You weren't supporting me. I was supporting you," she scoffed. Oh, please. That little bit of rent you paid? A little bit of rent?" I pulled a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. It was a printout of the last 12 months of my bank transfers to my father's account, next to a column showing their monthly mortgage payment. I handed it to her. "I was paying 80% of your mortgage. Not to mention the new water heater, the electrical panel, and half a dozen other things you conveniently forgot you never paid me back for. You weren't my safety net. I was yours." My mother stared at the paper, her face draining of color. My father, who was still sitting on the steps, finally looked up. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. Dale snatched the paper from my mother's hand. He scanned it, his bravado crumbling into confusion. This can't be right." "The ledger doesn't lie, Dale," I said. Then I looked past him, my gaze landing on Angelina, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, horrified eyes. And speaking of things that aren't right, it's amazing what you can learn about people when you start digging. Crypto investments, non-existent businesses. It's a messy world out there. Angelina went rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 bright spots of blush on her cheeks. She knew exactly what I was talking about. Dale, however, was oblivious. "What are you talking about? What crypto?" I just held Angelina's gaze, letting the threat hang in the air between us. I wouldn't expose her, not unless I had to. The knowledge was enough. The power was in the potential for detonation, not the explosion itself. She swallowed hard and took a half step back, away from Dale. My mother, seeing she'd lost the financial argument, tried one last time. "This is still our home. We raised you here, and I'm grateful for the good parts of that," I said, and I meant it. "But this house is now my property. I'm happy to discuss rental terms with you and Dad. The basement is also available for Dale and Angelina. I'll even offer a family discount." The sheer audacity of my offer stunned them into silence again. They stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. The idea of paying rent to me, of living in my house under my rules, was so far outside their reality that they couldn't even process it. "You can't be serious," Dale finally whispered. "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied. I looked at my parents, at the 2 people who were supposed to protect me. For the first time, I think they truly saw me, not as their disappointing daughter, but as a stranger who held all the cards. I let the silence sit for a moment longer before I delivered the final blow. It wasn't loud or angry. It was just the quiet, painful truth. "You taught me how to survive," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I just never expected I'd have to survive you." With that, I stepped back inside. I closed the door on their shocked faces, turned the deadbolt, and leaned against it, the click of the lock echoing in the suddenly empty house. 2 months later, the house was quiet. It was a deep, settled quiet that felt entirely different from the tense silence that used to hang in the air when my family was home. I had moved my things out of storage and into the upstairs master bedroom. Sleeping in my parents' old room felt strange at first, like a violation of some unspoken rule, but now it was just my room. They never took me up on my offer to rent. Of course they didn't. Their pride wouldn't allow it. The day after the confrontation on the porch, they packed their things and left without a word. My mother left a single scathing note on the kitchen counter. I hope you're happy. From what I've gathered through the grapevine, they're staying with my aunt 2 hours away. Dale and Angelina's perfect start imploded spectacularly. I never had to use the information from Cameron. The revelation that I, the family failure, was secretly the one holding everything together was a blow Dale's ego couldn't withstand. He and Angelina are crashing on a friend's sofa. Their plans for a sage green sanctuary indefinitely postponed. I haven't spoken to any of them. Tonight, Madison was over. We were sitting on the back deck, my back deck, sharing a bottle of wine. The late summer air was warm, and the sky was filled with stars. So how does it feel? She asked, swirling the wine in her glass. To be queen of the castle? I looked around at the familiar backyard, the big oak tree I used to climb as a kid, the flower beds my dad had so carefully tended. It was all mine, but the victory didn't taste as sweet as I thought it would. It feels empty, I admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant, powerful, but mostly I just feel unburdened. Madison nodded, understanding. You didn't just buy a house, Nick. You bought your freedom. It's okay if that feels a little lonely at first. You spent your whole life with their noise in your head. It'll take time to get used to the quiet. She was right. The revenge had been a means to an end. It was a loud, dramatic severing of ties that should have been cut years ago. The house was the prize, but the silence was the reward. It was a blank slate, and while it was intimidating, it was also mine to fill. We finished the wine, talking about her latest real estate nightmare and my plans to repaint the living room. It was normal, easy, a friendship that didn't require ledgers or secret tests of loyalty. When she left, the quiet of the house settled around me again, but this time it felt less like an absence and more like peace. A week later, the mail came. Tucked between a credit card offer and a water bill was a small plain envelope with my name written in my father's familiar shaky handwriting. There was no return address. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter full of anger or a plea for forgiveness. It was a single sheet of notepaper. 4 words were written on it. Thank you for the roses. At first, I didn't understand. Then I remembered. The day after they left, I'd noticed my mother's prize-winning rose bushes were starting to wilt. On instinct, I had gone out and watered them. I'd been watering them every few days since, a habit ingrained from years of helping my dad in the garden. He must have driven by. He must have seen me. Tucked behind the note was a photograph. It was old and faded, the corners soft with age. It was a picture of me, maybe 12 years old, standing in this very yard, holding a green watering can. I was smiling, a genuine, uncomplicated smile, my face turned toward the sun as I watered a patch of bright red flowers. Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It wasn't a solution. But it was an acknowledgement. A quiet admission from the man who was always silent that he saw me. Not as a victor or a villain, but as the daughter who still watered the garden. I put the photo on my new mantelpiece, right in the center. The house was still quiet, the echoes of my family still lingering in the corners if I listened too hard. But looking at that picture, I finally understood. I didn't win a war. I just stopped losing.
My name is Elise Mercer. I was a captain in Army intelligence, though you won't find my name on most public records. And today I stood in a courtroom while my sister's attorney called me a fraud. She's not a real soldier, he said, his voice loud smooth, meant for headlines. She has no service record, no DD-214, no VA claims, just a limp and a story. The gallery didn't gasp. They chuckled. Quietly. Like the matter was settled. Like the woman in the plain black suit at the defendant's table, me was just another imposter playing veteran for inheritance. I didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Let them believe what they needed to. I'd learned long ago that truth doesn't need to explain itself. It just waits. But then someone else stood. From the edge of the courtroom, behind a modest oak desk cluttered with paperwork, the clerk rose. She looked no different than any other staffer, clean-bun navy blouse badge, tucked discreetly into her waistband. But when she spoke, the room snapped into silence. "Permission to speak, Your Honor." The judge, confused, nodded once. The clerk's voice was steady, clear, loud enough for the entire room to hear. That woman, Captain Elise Mercer, was my commanding officer. She saved my unit in Kandahar. I owe her my life. And just like that, the laughter stopped. Not because I argued, not because I protested, but because the truth finally stood up and saluted me. I hadn't seen the house in 12 years. Not since the night I left, with nothing but a rucksack, a bus ticket, and a number I wasn't even sure would connect. They'd repainted it since then, some neutral beige like they were trying to erase the past. But the porch still sagged near the steps, and the wind still caught the chimes just wrong, like it was trying to shake the place loose. Inside, nothing had changed. The same stiff leather chairs, the same silent piano, and the same photo frames, except they were all of Violet now. Violet in her graduation gown. Violet at a firm's holiday gala. Violet holding our grandmother's hand at a church event I was never told about. Not a single photo of me. It was like I had died and been edited out of memory. She greeted me from the top of the stairs like she was hosting a charity auction. Not a sister, not even an old friend, just a stranger who knew how to smile for cameras. "You came," Violet said, voice clipped. "I was told you wouldn't show. I wasn't invited," I answered. She gave a tiny shrug. Must have been an oversight. There it was, the casual erasure she'd perfected. An entire childhood together, boiled down to oversight. Mom appeared behind her, wearing a soft sweater and that same polite, thin-lipped smile she always wore when pretending not to choose sides. "We weren't sure if you were still reachable. Reachable. Like I was some distant storm on the radar. "I'm here because Grandswill named me," I said. "That's all." They led me into the living room like I was a guest. Not a daughter, not a sister. Just some inconvenience with legal standing. Dad didn't look up from his phone when I entered. Not until I sat. Then, like clockwork, he glanced at me and frowned, as if I was furniture someone had forgotten to replace. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. The lawyer read the standard sections first. Items, bank accounts, minor provisions. I listened quietly. Then came the land. Whitman Ridge, 40 acres of forest and field our grandmother had protected like her own breath. "I leave the ridge," the lawyer read to Elise Mercer, my granddaughter, in full recognition of her service and integrity. The air dropped 10 degrees. My father leaned forward. "That's impossible. There must be an error." "It's in her handwriting," the lawyer replied, holding up the signed page. Violet laughed, a soft, practiced sound with sharp edges. "She's not even a veteran. She never served." And that's when the lawsuit came. Not a protest, not a family meeting, a full legal action. They sued me for fraud. And that was the last time I ever stepped into that house. Not because I lost, but because I finally understood they'd never left space on the wall for me. Only blank frames where I was never meant to be. I didn't respond to the lawsuit right away. My attorney, a quiet man named Harris, who smelled like old books and never asked personal questions, told me I had 30 days. I used 29. Not out of fear, out of something colder, disappointment. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was how rehearsed it all felt. Like they'd planned this years ago. Like the only question was when I'd show my face again so they could finally erase it properly, with documents and signatures and public record. The legal claim read like a gossip column dressed in legalese. Elise Mercer, hereinafter referred to as defendant, has knowingly and with intent to deceive misrepresented her service history and fabricated military credentials to unjustly claim property designated under conditional inheritance. They had no proof, because proof required access, and access to my record wasn't something even my own commanding officers always had. That was the cost of operating under protected status. When things went wrong, you vanished from systems, not just from people. Still reading those words, I felt like I was back in that tent in the dark, bleeding into my boot, waiting for extraction. Alone. Violet didn't call, not to argue, not to gloat. She let her lawyers do the talking, same way she'd let Charm do the talking growing up. She was always the easier one. Easier to dress, easier to photograph, easier to explain at parties. I was the one who asked questions, who sat too long with maps, who corrected teachers and forgot to smile in group photos. Eventually, I stopped showing up in them at all. I think that's when they started pretending I didn't exist. And when someone pretends long enough, they start to believe it. That's what the courtroom was about. Not just the land, not just the money. It was about control. About declaring in front of a judge that my silence wasn't dignity, it was proof of guilt. That because I didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't beg for a seat back at their table, I must be lying. And maybe once upon a time I'd have tried to prove them wrong. But not now. Now I only wanted one thing. For the truth to arrive without fanfare. Without theatrics, like rain on dry earth. So I told Harris I'll show up, I'll answer questions, but I won't explain myself. He hesitated. You understand they'll drag everything through the mud, I looked him in the eye. They can try, but mud doesn't stick to ghosts. And that was how I walked into that courtroom weeks later. Not to defend who I was, but to make space for the silence I had earned. The first time I went missing from the records, it was on purpose. After Kabul, after that last mission no one talked about in writing, we were pulled from visibility. Not retired, not discharged. Just removed. Our names went into sealed lists, and our movements didn't exist. Not officially. Most people think the military is built on medals and parades, but real service, especially in intelligence, happens in places too dark for recognition. We were the ones who arrived quietly and left before sunrise. The ones who watched patterns, not battlefields, who called for evac before the bombs fell, not after, who held people together with zip ties and instinct. My final deployment lasted 7 months. We lost 2 people. I took a piece of shrapnel through my right side during extraction. I bled out behind a collapsed wall while calling for the rookie who froze in place. That rookie was Emily Torres. She was the clerk now. Back then, she was a 22-year-old comms officer on her first assignment, paralyzed by the sound of real war. I had to drag her by her vest while keeping pressure on my side with a field wrap. She cried the entire time. I didn't. She made it. I nearly didn't. When I woke up in Germany, they offered me options: honorable discharge with a closed file, or remain classified, disappear from public view, and take an advisory role. I chose the latter, because I knew what would happen if I came back with a medal and a story. They'd still say I was lying. They always had. Even before the military, when I brought home straight A's and Mom said, "Why can't you be more like Violet?" Even when I saved up for my own school trip, and Dad said, "You think we owe you something," so I took the role in the shadows. Became an analyst. Worked with students at the War College. Advised on logistics in disaster zones. Never made headlines. Never asked to. And then Gran passed, and her will surfaced. And suddenly, the family who had deleted me from every photo album came crawling back with legal teams and performative grief. They filed motions. They leaked whispers. Told friends I was unstable delusional. One article even claimed I'd faked PTSD to garner sympathy. I said nothing. Let the silence grow heavy. Because some truths are too wide for language. You have to let them arrive in their own time, wearing someone else's voice. And Emily. She hadn't spoken to me since that mission, until the day she stood in court and said, "That's my commander." The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was just the marble floors, or maybe it was the way they all looked at me like I was a character from a story they'd stopped believing in. Violet sat with perfect posture, hands folded just right, as if this were another photo shoot. Her lawyer was younger than I expected, loud in the way men are when they think volume counts for truth. He presented a slideshow of public records, or lack thereof. No service medal, no rank confirmation, no discharge papers. She has no file, he declared, because she has no service. The judge didn't nod, didn't frown. He just listened the way real power does. When it was my turn, Harris stood calmly and handed the court a sealed envelope. "This was submitted under sealed motion," he said, "to be opened only if necessary." The judge raised a brow. "We appear to have reached that point." He broke the seal, unfolded the letter slowly. His eyes moved across the page once, then again more slowly. Then without a word, he looked to the clerk. That was when it happened. Emily stood. Not hesitantly, not nervously, but like someone who had waited years for this. She stepped out from behind her desk and faced the court. "Your Honor," she said clearly. "Permission to speak." The judge blinked, caught off guard, then nodded once. She turned to the gallery, to Violet, to the row of reporters tapping at their phones, and then to me. "That woman," she said, her voice steady, "is the reason I'm alive. You could hear the ceiling fan. She led our team in Operation Crossfade, Kandahar 2020. I was new. I froze under fire. She didn't. She dragged me back. She covered us until evac arrived. I watched her take shrapnel for people she barely knew. She held up her wrist. A corded bracelet with a single bead missing. She gave me this. Said, 'Don't wait to be believed. Be undeniable.' I wear it every day." The room was still. Even the prosecutor didn't speak. The judge finally broke the silence. "Ms. Mercer, it appears we owe you an apology." I didn't answer. Just looked at Emily. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded one soldier to another. Violet whispered something to her lawyer, who suddenly looked less confident. My mother sat, rigid eyes unfocused. Dad rubbed his jaw finally out of rehearsed expressions. I hadn't moved, because I didn't need to. Someone else had stood up for me, not with argument, but with memory. And that kind of truth, it doesn't need a microphone, it just needs room to breathe. They dropped the case, of course. Not in the courtroom, not with any sense of grace or accountability, but in the shadows where people like them preferred to operate. 2 days after Emily stood and spoke the words they never expected to hear, their lawyers submitted a quiet motion to dismiss, without prejudice. As if everything they had accused me of, fraud, manipulation, impersonation, was just an unfortunate misunderstanding they'd rather not continue pursuing. No press statement, no apology, no acknowledgement. I read the withdrawal letter while sitting in my car outside the courthouse parking structure. It was cold that morning, the kind of cold that makes silence feel louder. I didn't feel vindicated, just empty. There was no satisfaction, no fireworks, just legal closure filed into a system that never cared who I really was to begin with. Violet didn't look at me when she left the courtroom that day. She gathered her things, adjusted her blazer, like she was leaving a board meeting, and walked out. Her lawyer scurried behind her, whispering frantic damage control. I don't think she even heard him. Mom was slower. She lingered in the hallway for a while, staring at the government seal on the courtroom door, like it might give her a better answer than the daughter she never understood. She didn't speak to me, didn't even nod, just tightened her scarf and left heels clicking faintly, as if trying to make a sound loud enough to cover the silence between us. Dad didn't turn around at all. He was already halfway down the hall when the rest of them emerged, hands shoved into coat pockets, head ducked low. As if he had somewhere important to be. As if the truth they'd tried to bury hadn't just stood up and saluted. And that was fine. Because I wasn't there to be loved. I wasn't there to be welcomed back into a family who never kept a seat open. I was there to be seen, just once, clearly, without interruption or excuse. Outside the courthouse, I sat alone on a wooden bench beneath a blooming dogwood tree. The blossoms had just started to split open that soft early pink that always reminded me of the ridge behind Grand's land. I hadn't seen that color in years. Emily found me there. She didn't ask to sit. She just did. Her uniform jacket was folded over one arm, and her hair looser now than it had been in court framed her face with the kind of honesty you can't fake. She held the bracelet in her hand, the one I gave her in Kandahar, still missing that single bead, still frayed at the edges. "I thought you were dead," she said quietly, eyes still on the cord. "I was," I answered. "At least to them." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. "You don't survive that kind of night together without inheriting a language no one else speaks." "I wanted to say something sooner," she said, "but I figured if you were staying quiet, it was for a reason." "It was," I told her. "But it wasn't protection. It was exhaustion. You get tired of trying to prove what's already true." We sat in silence for a while. No pressure to fill the space. No need to explain what only we had lived. She reached over and tried to give me the bracelet. I closed her fingers around it gently. "No, that one belongs to you now." She smiled but didn't argue. "You were the first person who made me feel like I belonged in uniform," she said. "You didn't yell. You didn't treat me like a mistake. You weren't." She looked at me then. Full on. "Neither were you." And then, without ceremony, she stood. No handshake, no hug. Just a slow, deliberate salute, imperfect, a little crooked, but real. One soldier to another. That night, I went back to Grand's house. The deed had transferred. The legal dust had settled. But something still felt unfinished. I wandered the hallways, touching walls that had once held laughter and lies. The photo wall was still there. Violet's face repeated 5 times. My mother's at her bridal shower. My father shaking hands with a governor he never voted for. Dozens of moments staged for the world. And one empty frame. Just a brass hook. No picture. No explanation. A phantom space where a memory used to be. I searched for it. I didn't know why until I found it. Upstairs in a box, tucked behind a shelf of old hymnals, wrapped in a cloth napkin like something sacred. It was me, 13, wearing my junior cadet uniform, boots too big, grin too wide, compass in hand, standing in front of the garage where I used to build rope courses with Gran's help. She'd kept it, hidden it, protected it. Not because she was ashamed of me, but because she knew they were. I hung it back where it belonged. Didn't ask for permission. Didn't say a word. Just stood there for a while, watching the frame settle back into place. And for the first time in years, I felt like something in this house could finally see me too. It's been 6 months since the court dismissed the case. 6 months since the silence finally said my name aloud. I didn't move back into Gran's house. I couldn't. Some walls hold too much memory to be lived in again. Instead, I turned the land at Whitman Ridge into something else entirely, a place where women like me could breathe. I filed for zoning permits, reached out to an old contact in logistics, bought second-hand bunk beds from a decommissioned base, named it quietly the Ridge House. We don't advertise it. There are no press releases, no grants named after fallen heroes. But word travels. Slowly, privately, and the right women find it. We house former service members, mostly women, who've been buried by paperwork, by trauma, by silence. Some of them come with nothing but a duffel bag and a discharge number no one bothered to explain. Others bring years of decorated service and no place to go. What they have in common is what the world won't see. They've been invisible too long. Emily visits once a month, not to talk about Kandahar, we never do, but to teach financial skills to the newer arrivals. She's good with numbers, better with people. She jokes, sometimes calls me Captain Still Doesn't Smile. I let her. Violet hasn't spoken to me, not directly, but last month I received a letter from her office, not from her, from her intern. It was an invitation to a women-in-law fundraising banquet, the kind that uses words like legacy and integrity while sipping white wine in rooms that smell like polished ego. I declined. I didn't send a message back. Didn't need to. I already had mine. The photo wall at Ridge House is different from the one in Grand's hallway. It's not curated. No matching frames, no spotlights, just snapshots pinned to corkboard women in muddy boots laughing with coffee mugs. Some in uniform, some not. One wall is dedicated to things we carried: bracelets, tags, letters we never sent. In the center, a frame hangs alone. It's the picture Emily gave me. A photo of her and I, taken just days before that mission. Neither of us smiling, just standing side by side, hands on hips, eyes forward. We didn't know what was coming, but we were ready for it. Below it, I added a quote in black ink. Don't wait to be believed. Be undeniable. It took me too long to understand that I wasn't broken, I was built differently. They didn't know how to translate me, so they silenced me. And I let them. For years I let them. But silence isn't absence, it's memory under pressure. And one day, when the weight becomes too much, it ruptures in courtrooms, in whispers, in a clerk's steady voice that won't be ignored. The day Emily stood for me, I felt something shift. Not pride, not vengeance, just stillness. Like the earth finally stopped tilting under my feet. I don't need their names on my resume. I don't need their approval, their apology, their family photos that never made room for mine. Because the one salute I received, quiet, imperfect, and true, is the only one I carry forward. You can take medals, you can strip honors, but once someone has stood in a room full of strangers and said, "That's my commander, you can't take that back, not ever." And you don't need the world to believe you, only one person who already does. My name is Calla Merritt, 30 years old, former Army intelligence officer. At least that's what my discharge papers said, though no one in that courtroom believed it. Not even my family. When I stepped through those double doors that morning, the air was stiff with judgment. My mother wouldn't look at me. My brother Malcolm grinned like he was already winning. And across the aisle, their lawyer stood with a smug little folder labeled fraud. The judge adjusted his glasses and asked flatly, "Ms. Merritt, are you now or have you ever been a member of the United States Armed Forces?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I glanced down at the worn oak table in front of me, at the small wooden box I'd placed there. It was wrapped in a folded American flag, creased from years of careful keeping. No one asked about it. No one dared to touch it. Behind me, a whisper floated from the gallery. "That's her," like I was some kind of urban legend. A lie given legs. Then the back doors opened. Boots stepped in, 6 pairs polished to mirror shine. A decorated general led them forward in full dress uniform. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. The judge blinked, and the general said calmly, "Your Honor, we are here to correct the record and to honor Major Calla Merritt for service that should never have been questioned." Everything after that, no one in that courtroom forgot. And neither did I. The truth is, I was never supposed to speak about what I did. Not during the operations, not after the discharge, not even when they called me a fraud. Silence had been trained into me, code words, black files, no cameras, no names. You serve in the shadows, they told us. If the system works, no one will ever know you were there. I didn't expect that one day I'd wish someone had known. It started when I was 22. I'd graduated early from a military prep program, top of my class in analysis and language. I didn't fit the mold of the loud, hard-charging recruits. I was precise, patient, invisible. And that made me valuable. They assigned me to a specialized intel unit embedded in Operation River Dust. It's not something you'll find in a Google search. The deployment lasted 14 months stateside and abroad, but I only remember fragments, concrete walls, long nights in windowless rooms, maps with no names, and the moment a convoy I was riding in hit an IED. I remember the sound before the pain. The last thing I saw before blacking out was a man, Corporal Tennyson, trying to pull me from the wreckage. He didn't make it. I did. 3 cracked ribs, 1 partially collapsed lung, and a Purple Heart I never bothered to collect. They flew me back under the radar. No medals, no press. just a sealed medical file and a letter of discharge marked undisclosed assignment completed. When I got home, I didn't know how to explain any of it. Mom asked why I was limping. I said I slipped on ice. My brother asked if I had quit basic. I didn't answer. Dad was already gone, by then he'd left years earlier, but I don't think it would have made a difference. None of them asked twice. Only Grandpa noticed the scar along my side. Only he looked at me and saw through the quiet. "You still carry the weight like you're in uniform," he said once, handing me a cup of tea. "But you don't need to prove anything in this house." I already know. That was the only place I ever felt like I could breathe. After he passed, the will came as a surprise to everyone but me. He left the farmhouse to my mother, the workshop to my brother, but the flag from his funeral, his medals, and a third of his estate went to me, along with a letter that simply read, "For service no one thanked you for." The ink hadn't even dried before the calls began. My mother's voice on voicemail, sharp and cold. "You manipulated him. Don't pretend to be something you're not." My brother's lawyer sent the first notice. They were contesting the will, and worse, they were calling into question my entire military record. They said I never served, that I faked it to earn Grandpa's trust, that I forged the letter. They demanded proof, but the one thing I had, the file, was sealed. The Army wouldn't release it without a federal order, and so I sat, silent, watching my name dissolve in rumors and paperwork and smirks from people who had never heard the snap of gunfire, but thought they knew the sound of honor. The more I stayed quiet, the more confident they became. And maybe that's why they filed the lawsuit. Maybe they thought the silence meant they'd already won. They were wrong. When you grow up in a family that values image over intimacy, you learn early how to disappear without ever leaving the room. That's what it felt like sitting there at the defendant's table, my hands resting quietly beside the flag-wrapped box. I could feel their eyes on me, sharp, dissecting, hungry, for confirmation that I was the villain they'd already written into their story. My mother was the first to testify. She wore a navy dress and pearls I hadn't seen since church as a child. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, like she was the real victim in all this. She was always imaginative, she told the court. As a girl, Calla used to invent these elaborate stories about saving people, being a secret agent. We thought it was cute at first, but then she stopped coming home for holidays, stopped returning calls. And when she finally did come back, she said she'd been deployed, but there were no photos, no official records. Just silence. The judge nodded, scribbled something. My mother didn't look at me once. Then came Malcolm. My brother had always played the Golden Sunwell varsity football business school, twice divorced, and still smug about it. He sat tall, confident, rehearsed. "I'm the one who took care of Grandpa the last few years," he said. "I'm the one who visited him, paid his bills, kept this family together, while she was off doing whatever she was doing." Then, suddenly, she shows up at the will reading, talking about her service, like she's Rambo. He even did air quotes when he said service. I didn't move, didn't blink. Their lawyer followed, flipping through pages of supposed inconsistencies. No discharge papers, no VA registration, a medical report with missing sections, photos from family events where I was absent. "She's constructed a myth," he declared. "A convenient one, timed perfectly to benefit from her grandfather's death. This is a case of calculated deception, and we intend to prove it." I watched the judge's eyes narrow slightly, as if this were all beginning to make sense. And maybe it did, because what kind of soldier comes back with no medals, no paperwork, no uniform? What kind of veteran has no stories to tell a fake one, or at least that's what they were trying to prove? I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout that they were wrong, that I remembered the exact sound of Tennyson's breath fading next to mine, that I still woke up with my shirt clinging to my ribs, that I knew what it meant to feel your bones rattle under explosion and your silence rewarded with survival. But instead, I said nothing, because everything I wanted to scream was buried in a classified document that no one was allowed to see. So I sat, silent, as they tore me apart with smiles and statements that sounded like concern but tasted like poison. Only once did I let my eyes meet my mother's. She glanced away instantly, as if I'd done something indecent just by existing. The judge called for a recess. As people shuffled out, I remained seated. Behind me, someone muttered, "She doesn't even look military." And maybe they were right. I wasn't built for parades or uniforms or speeches. I didn't have a wall of framed commendations, but I did have that box. I placed both hands on it now, gently, as if steadying myself through contact. Inside was the only proof I still trusted, not of my service, but of the price someone else had paid for it. I had carried Tennyson's flag with me for 6 years, and if I was going to fall, I would fall holding it. The courtroom felt colder after recess. Maybe it was the fluorescent lights overhead, or the way my brother smirked at me from the plaintiff's table like he'd already won. Their lawyer rose again, pressing harder now. "Ms. Merritt," he said, pacing slowly, "we've reviewed every available database. Your name does not appear in the National Archives under military records. We've spoken with the Department of Veterans Affairs. No claims, no benefits filed. Isn't it true that you never served and that this entire performance is a calculated effort to defraud your own family?" The judge turned his eyes toward me. My mouth was dry. My hands, still on the flag-wrapped box, felt heavier than before. "I have no comment," I said. A quiet scoff rose from the gallery. "Of course she doesn't," Malcolm muttered under his breath, loud enough for the court recorder to capture. The lawyer stepped closer. "Do you even deny it? Right here, right now, will you state for the record that you served in the United States military silence?" Because I had already signed the document that said I would not speak of my assignment. I had sworn to protect classified information, even if it meant standing alone. Even here. The lawyer threw up his hands theatrically. No further questions. He sat down like a man who knew the finish line was already in sight. The judge cleared his throat. "Unless the defense can provide credible documentation or witness testimony, we will be moving to final statements." My attorney, a soft-spoken public defender named Evelyn, who believed me, but had no tools to fight, what she couldn't prove, stood with the thinnest folder I'd ever seen in a courtroom. "We request a short delay," she said. "We've submitted a federal motion for a sealed record review, but it hasn't." "I understand," the judge interrupted. "But this court is not a waiting room for bureaucratic red tape. I'll allow 10 more minutes." And just like that, my time started bleeding out. Evelyn sat back down. She looked at me helplessly. I gave her a faint smile, not because I was calm, because I had nothing left to give. I looked at the flag again, folded so tightly it looked like it couldn't breathe either. 9 minutes left. I heard the clock tick. 8, 7, and then a knock. Not at the judge's chamber. At the back doors of the courtroom. The bailiff hesitated, then walked to the rear. He opened it halfway and leaned out, murmuring to someone. A pause. Then he turned back inside, eyes wide. "Your Honor," he said, voice slightly strained, "there's someone here to address the court. He says it's urgent." The judge frowned. "Who?" The doors opened fully. A man stepped through in full army dress blues. His chest bore ribbons that looked too heavy to carry. Silver stars lined his shoulder boards. The room inhaled sharply as the brass glinted under courtroom lights. "I'm Lieutenant General Henry Alcott," he said, loud but steady. "Retired. Former Director of Special Reconnaissance and Covert Response." The judge stood instinctively. "General, this is a closed civil hearing. Unless you were summoned, I wasn't," Alcott said. "But I've read the transcript, and I have clearance to declassify what needs to be said." He turned to me then. Our eyes met. I hadn't seen him in 6 years. His face was older, but the gaze, sharp, unreadable, was the same as the day he signed my final deployment report. "I am here," he said slowly, "to confirm the service identity and sacrifice of Major Calla Merritt." Dead silence. No one moved. Not the judge. Not Malcolm. Not even my mother. Alcott stepped forward and gently set a black leather folder on the clerk's desk. "This is her sealed record," he said, "and I've brought more than just paperwork." The doors opened again. 6 uniformed soldiers entered too, carrying a folded American flag in a glass case. The air changed. It no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a memorial. I don't think anyone in that room fully grasped what was happening, not yet. Even the judge looked unmoored, caught between protocol and reverence. His gavel hovered above the bench, forgotten. The court reporter had stopped typing. General Alcott stepped to the center of the room. The 6 soldiers formed a line behind him, each moving in perfect sync. No fanfare, no commands shouted. Just the quiet authority of people who had done this before, but rarely in front of civilians. "I understand this is a civil dispute," Alcott began. "But this young woman is being asked to prove something the government swore her to keep secret." He opened the leather folder. "This document, declassified this morning under my personal request and with the authorization of the Department of Defense, confirms that Calla Merritt served as a covert operations analyst with the 84th ISR Tactical Division from 2014 to 2018. Her missions included encrypted counterintel work, which remains sensitive. Her honorable discharge is on file. So is the medical documentation from an injury sustained in the field, and the Bronze Star she never claimed." He turned to me again. His voice softened. "You earned your silence, Major. You didn't deserve to be punished for it." I hadn't moved. Couldn't move. My heart pounded so loud, it felt like it might rupture through my ribs. One of the soldiers stepped forward and carefully placed the glass case on the evidence table. Inside was a perfectly folded American flag, and beside it a medal I'd only seen in other people's photographs. Bronze Star. Beneath it was a citation slip already signed and dated. The general gestured gently. "Proceed." The 6 soldiers shifted. Then right there in the middle of the courtroom, they saluted me. Not a casual nod, not ceremony for show. This was a full military honor, precise reverence still. One soldier, a woman younger than me by at least a decade, stepped forward and read aloud. "For meritorious achievement and unwavering duty under hostile conditions, the United States Army recognizes Major Calla Merritt for exceptional service in defense of national interests." Her silence was not avoidance. It was duty. "This flag is presented in her name with honor and with thanks." My vision blurred. But I didn't cry, because crying would have felt like letting go of something sacred, and I was still holding it, still anchoring myself to the box, to Tennyson's flag, to every moment I'd convinced myself none of it mattered. Someone behind me rose. Then another. The gallery, silent moments ago, stood one by one. Even the judge stood, his face pale. "This court," he said quietly, "recognizes the legitimacy of Major Merritt's service and withdraws all demands for further documentation." He turned to my mother, who looked ashen. "To the plaintiffs, I suggest you reconsider the direction of your claims, or we proceed with a defamation counter-motion under federal protection laws." Malcolm sat down like something had punched the air out of him. My mother's hands trembled, clinging to the pearls at her neck. But none of that mattered anymore. I stood slowly. The flag on the table reflected in the glass like water under light. General Alcott stepped forward and saluted me again, this time without words. I returned it. And in that moment, everything I'd carried, the silence, the shame, the exile, didn't vanish. It simply became seen. Seen not as something to apologize for, but something to salute. After the courtroom emptied, I sat alone at the defense table, the flag and medal still in front of me. Everyone else had scattered, some too embarrassed to make eye contact, others pretending not to have stared when the soldiers saluted. The judge had called an immediate recess. Malcolm vanished without a word. My mother lingered near the doorway, hands still clenched tight, as if holding on to the last version of the story where she was right. She didn't approach me, and I didn't call her over. Instead, I looked down at the folded flag, the one they had brought me. Not Tennyson's. That one remained in the box I carried untouched, because his flag wasn't for show. It was for memory. I finally stood, my legs unsteady, and slipped the medal into the pocket of my blazer. Evelyn, my attorney, approached slowly. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded, but my voice didn't work yet. She glanced at the table. "I've never seen anything like that," she said. The courtroom standing. The general. That citation. I still couldn't speak, because none of this had been about winning. It had been about surviving the story they'd written about me without my consent. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stepped into the sunlight, half expecting someone to stop me to grab my arm and say, "Wait, we need another answer. Another explanation. A better story that makes you easier to believe." But no one did. I walked past the courthouse steps, past the reporters who had arrived too late, and kept walking until the crowd thinned. At the corner, I heard a voice. "Calla." I turned. It was my mother. She looked tired, older than she had that morning. Her lipstick had worn off, and her eyes were glassy. For a moment, I wondered if she'd cry, but she didn't. "You never told us," she said. "You let us think the worst." I looked at her carefully. "No," I said. "You chose to." She blinked, stunned. "That's not fair. Neither is calling your daughter a liar in front of a judge." Her shoulders dropped, but she didn't argue. She tried, then stopped. "I didn't understand. You were always distant." Because silence was the only safe thing I had. A long pause passed between us. She looked down at my hands. At the case. At the flag. "You kept that old box," she murmured. "It's not yours to talk about." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake or accuse. I just said it plainly, like a statement of boundary, instead of vengeance. And then I turned to leave. She didn't call after me. She didn't apologize either. But she didn't follow. And somehow that was enough. When I got home that night, I placed the two flags side by side, the one they had brought to the courtroom, and the one I had carried in silence. One was for me, the other for the man who had pulled me out of fire with his last breath. Tennyson never got a courtroom moment, never got to watch people stand. But maybe, just maybe, he would have smiled at the way I did. The way I stood still when the world tried to erase me. Not screaming, not pleading, just standing. Because sometimes being real costs more than being believed. And sometimes the cost is exactly what makes it worth it. I didn't return to the courtroom for the verdict. Evelyn called later to confirm the case had been dismissed with prejudice. Malcolm and my mother didn't contest. There was nothing left to claw at once the silence cracked open, and Honor walked in wearing full uniform. But even then, no one apologized. And I've made peace with that. These days, I don't speak of that trial, not to strangers, not to press, not even to other veterans. What happened inside that room wasn't a victory, it was a reckoning. A public correction of a quiet truth. 2 months later, I founded The Quiet Fold, a small program that offers legal support for service members from classified units, those who come home with nothing but scars and silence. We don't do press releases. We don't wear medals. We sit in courtrooms. We write letters. We prove what others can't. One evening, long after the office closed, I found myself alone, reorganizing files. I opened the drawer where I kept both flags, Tennyson's, and the one from the courtroom. I laid them flat beside each other, then lit the small lamp above. Same folds, same weight, different stories, but both real. There's a framed photo on the wall now taken from that day in court. The moment right before they saluted. I didn't know someone had captured it, but when it arrived in the mail, unsigned, no return address, I knew exactly who sent it. On the bottom of the frame, I had a line engraved. She didn't raise her voice. She raised her flag. And maybe that's the legacy I carry now. Not one built on noise or fury, but on quiet truth. Because the loudest thing I've ever done was stand still and let the world see who I already was. My name is Elena Maddox. I'm 29, a trauma nurse with the U.S. Navy 3 deployments under my belt, and a gut that doesn't lie, especially when something feels off. That morning, I stepped out of the taxi with a duffel slung over one shoulder and my uniform still clinging to the salt of Okinawa. The wind in Oregon had that kind of bite only early winter could bring sharp and familiar. I stood in front of my childhood home, expecting what exactly? A surprise hug. A porch light left on the windows were dark. No movement behind the curtains. The door was locked. I knocked once. Then again. Nothing. Across the street, Mrs. Donnelly was pushing her beagle in a stroller. She stopped mid-step like she'd seen a ghost. "Elena, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be deployed?" "Came back early," I said. "Surprising the family." She blinked. "Oh, honey. They're not home." My fingers stiffened around the strap of my bag. "They left for Maui last week. Some fancy resort. Didn't they tell you I didn't answer?" Because in that exact moment, I knew something had gone deeply, quietly, unforgivably wrong. And I wasn't done finding out just how wrong yet. County General was 40 minutes away, but the ride felt like it took years off my life. The taxi smelled like old fries and disinfectant. I sat in the back with my fists clenched boots, tapping the floor like they had something to say. My phone sat useless in my lap. No new messages, no missed calls. Just a black mirror reflecting a woman trying not to imagine the worst. At the hospital entrance, I handed over my ID and asked for Henry Maddox. The nurse at the front desk looked up from her monitor. "Relation granddaughter," I said. Her eyes softened. She checked the screen. "Room 526. ICU. You'll need a pass." She paused. "No one's been by." "Since admission." I blinked. "He's been here?" "How long?" "Admitted 12 days ago," she said gently. "Cardiac failure. Kidney complications. Sedated. 12 days. And not a single visit. Not from my mother. Not from my brother. Not from my sister. No flowers. No calls. Not even a damn card." The elevator ride was silent, except for the blood in my ears. When the doors opened, I stepped into the sterile corridor and walked past rows of closed-doors machines, beeping behind each one, like quiet metronomes of waiting. ICU smells different from the rest of the hospital, cleaner, colder, like a place that's holding its breath. Room 526 was dim. The heart monitor was the only sound, a steady rhythm I didn't trust. He looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. The man who once built our fence by hand, who carried lumber like it was paper, now lay sunken into the bed. Tubes in his mouth, wires down his arms, a blanket pulled too high, like someone had tried to hide the truth. I sat beside him, placed my hand on his, and just whispered, "Hey, Grandpa." "It's me." His hand didn't move. His chest rose and fell with the machines, not him. I reached into my bag and pulled out the aftershave I'd bought him in Okinawa, same brand he used when I was little, the one that smelled like cedar and mint and safety. I set it gently on the bedside table, unopened. The pharmacy receipt still tucked inside. A nurse stepped in mid-30s, exhausted but kind. "You're Elena." I nodded. "Stable but critical," she said. "He hasn't woken since the first night." I asked the only question that mattered. "Has anyone else come?" She shook her head. "Not one." I turned back to the bed, hand still resting on his. They knew he was here. They just didn't care. Back in the hospital lobby, I sat with a burnt coffee, and silence that rang louder than anything. My fingers curled around the paper cup like it was a grenade I wasn't sure how to throw. Every part of me wanted to scream, but I'd spent enough years in uniform to know action beats noise. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The transaction history read like a vacation blog. Resort fees in Maui, spa packages, plane tickets booked 2 days after Grandpa was admitted, a $1 $200 charge for healing crystals from a boutique shop that couldn't spell receipt right. Nothing, absolutely nothing for medical bills. The last charge remotely connected to Grandpa was dated over a month ago. Pharmacy. Paid in cash. I remembered it because I'd wired extra that week, thinking he'd need help covering it. And now I knew. He did. But he paid himself. And they got reimbursed anyway, from my account. Double dipping. Theft. My jaw locked so tight it hurt. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. Again. Same result. Then I tried my sister. She picked up on the third ring. Beach wind laughter, clinking glasses. "Elena, oh my God, we didn't know you were back. Isn't the ocean amazing right now? Grandpa's in ICU. The silence was instant, solid. Wait, what has been for 12 days? Heart failure, no visitors. The nurse thought he was abandoned. Oh, she said as if I'd told her the mail was late. I thought he was doing okay when we left. So you did know. Mom said he was just tired. We needed a break. He collapsed. I mean, Elena, she sighed, you don't know how hard it's been. Reed's finals, Mom's migraines, and I've been through a lot emotionally. This trip I froze the accounts. Silence again. Longer this time. Then a sharp intake of breath. You heard me. I've seen every charge, every brunch, every spa. Not one hospital bill. You left him to die and went to Bali. You can't do that. I already did. I needed that card, no grandpa needed a family. I hung up. There was no catharsis, no cinematic swell of justice, just paperwork. I walked back upstairs, found the nurse, and asked to see the billing department. They gave me a clipboard of unpaid invoices. Addressed to my mother's house. Redirect everything to me, I said. No one else gets access, not without my signature. The woman behind the desk blinked. They said you were deployed. They lied, I said, and I'm here now. In that moment, it didn't matter that I didn't have answers yet. I had leverage, and I was just getting started. Grandpa's room was quiet when I came back. Same beeping monitors, same soft hiss of oxygen, same two-white blanket pulled up like a lie. But something in the air had shifted, like the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. I sat beside him, pulled the chair close until our knees nearly touched. His hand felt warmer than before. Still unmoving, still heavy with sleep, but not cold. That meant something. I held it for a long time, just breathing, just being there. Then I saw it. A small manila envelope tucked into the bottom drawer of the nightstand, half hidden beneath a plastic comb, and a faded copy of Reader's Digest. It had my name on it. My full name, Elena Therese Maddox. Written in his shaky block letters, the way he always addressed birthday cards. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there staring at it, fingers resting on the flap heart, doing strange things inside my chest. I already knew what it was. Not the contents, not exactly, but the truth it would confirm. That this wasn't just neglect. It was orchestrated, predicted, anticipated. He knew. Long before I did. I slid the envelope into my coat pocket and sat back, letting the plastic chair groan beneath me. Later in the kitchen of his house, cold dim, exactly as he left it, I opened it. 2 documents notarized. 1 durable power of attorney. 1 medical proxy. Both signed 11 weeks ago. Both naming me sole agent. Below them, a folded letter. Lined paper. Ink smeared in the corner, like he'd paused halfway through a sentence and rubbed his thumb against it. Elena, it began. If you're reading this, I'm guessing things happened the way I feared. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe they'd show up, that they'd care. But I've watched too many missed calls, too many silent weeks, too many transfer requests from your accounts for things I never received. I kept the records. You'll find them in the lockbox under my workbench, just in case you need proof. I paused, glanced toward the garage, then back to the letter. You were the only one who called, without needing something. You were the only one who asked how I was, and stayed to hear the answer. So I've made it simple. You're in charge now. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded it back, slid it into the envelope, and whispered into the empty room, copy that. Grandpa didn't want justice. He wanted me to be the one who stayed when no one else did. And now I had the paperwork to make that permanent. The courthouse smelled like lemon cleaner and wood that hadn't been polished in years. Light poured through the high windows, like it was trying to bless something that didn't deserve it. I sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blouse, hair pulled back, military tight, a folder in front of me, stuffed with everything that mattered, power of attorney, medical directive, bank statements, voice transcripts, screenshots, all labeled, all time-stamped, all real. Carver sat beside me, his tie crooked, but his posture sharp. He'd filed the emergency petition 3 days earlier. Now we were here, probate court small town, 1 judge, and the family that had stopped pretending they cared the moment money dried up. Across from us, my mother in pearls, my sister in designer knockoffs in spite, my brother already scrolling on his phone like court was a nuisance, not a reckoning. The judge entered. We stood, sat again. Carver spoke first. Your Honor, We're here to establish the sole legal authority of Ms. Maddox over the medical and financial affairs of Mr. Henry Maddox, currently in critical condition at County General. We're also requesting the formal removal of all inheritance claims and fiduciary rights from the respondents citing documented neglect and misappropriation of care funds. The judge raised one eyebrow. You're saying the family abandoned him? Carver didn't blink. They did more than that, Your Honor. They exploited his condition. And we can prove it. The evidence packet landed on the judge's bench like a quiet punch. Photos, receipts, voicemail logs. He read in silence for a long time. Then turning to me, he asked, "Do you have anything to add, Ms. Maddox?" I stood. "My grandfather raised me," I said. Not just in the legal sense. He fed me when others forgot. He showed up when others left. When I deployed, I sent money for his care because I trusted the people back here to use it for him. Not for beach resorts, not for mani-pedis and brunches, for him. I let that hang in the air. They left him in a hospital bed alone. No visits, no calls, no concern, just withdrawals. The judge turned to my mother. "Ma'am, do you wish to respond?" Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, families are complicated. My client assumed others were handling it. There was no ill intent." The judge's mouth flattened. Intent doesn't mean much to a man sedated in ICU for 12 days without a visitor. He signed the order. Effective immediately, all financial and medical decisions fall under my authority. Respondents barred from accessing joint accounts hospital staff or representing themselves as next of kin. The gavel came down soft, but the sound echoed louder than any scream. Outside the courtroom, my mother brushed past me. "You think you won," she hissed. I didn't stop walking. "No," I said. "I kept something. There's a difference." And this time, no one followed me out. I spent that night in the hospital. Not because I had to, but because there was nowhere else I wanted to be. They let me bring in a cot. One of the night nurses, the one with the quiet eyes and the tired kindness, handed me an extra blanket and said nothing. She didn't need to. People like her knew what presence meant, what it cost to stay when others didn't. Grandpa hadn't moved, still breathing through machines, still weightless and heavy at once. But the room didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt like someone was holding the line. I sat by his bed, read the newspaper aloud like I used to when I was a kid. I told him about court, about how the judge didn't even hesitate, about how Carver looked almost disappointed he didn't get to argue more, about how Mom tried to cry, but the judge didn't flinch. Then I took out the old bottle of aftershave and dabbed a little along his jawline with a damp cloth. The scent filled the room, slowly, cedar mint clean memory. He looked peaceful, and that made me angry in the strangest way. Because he deserved more than peace. He deserved to be honored, fought for, remembered. I looked at the side table. His journal was still there. I'd read it, cover to cover, already every bitter line. Every note about money he didn't receive, visits that never came, days he fell, and had to call strangers instead of family. Every sentence was truth I'd always suspected, but never wanted to confirm. I took the journal, flipped to the back, where he'd scribbled something across the inside cover. "If they ever try to make you feel guilty for doing the right thing, don't." I read that twice, then once more. Outside the window, the town was dark and quiet. Inside, just us, a girl and the man who never stopped believing in her. I squeezed his hand gently and whispered, "It's handled now, I promise." That night, I didn't sleep. I stood watch, not as a granddaughter, as his guardian. The funeral was quiet. No printed programs, no slideshow of curated smiles. Just a folded flag, a chaplain who'd served with him in Korea, and the two of us, him in the casket, and me beside it. My mother didn't come. Neither did my siblings. But 3 nurses from the ICU did. One left a paper crane on the edge of the coffin. Another cried quietly when I handed her a thank you card Grandpa had written weeks earlier and never got to give. Afterwards, I declined the reception and walked straight to the county clerk's office. I filed the paperwork to dissolve all joint accounts and started the process to establish the Maddox Foundation for Forgotten Veterans, a trust that would fund long-term care visitation services and legal advocacy for elderly vets with no one left. No press, no launch party, just one website, one form, and a dozen names from the hospital who were already waiting for anyone to remember them. I visited the first recipient the next week, a retired Air Force mechanic with no legs, no family, and a tremor in his voice when I asked if he wanted company. He looked up from his chair and whispered, "I thought I was done being worth someone's time." I sat beside him and said, "So did my grandfather. But we were both wrong, and that was the beginning of the real work, not revenge, not legacy, just rebuilding what shouldn't have been broken." It was late when the call came through. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar, but my heart was tired. Still, something told me to pick up. It was my sister. Her voice trembled before she even spoke. "Elena," she said, barely audible. "I didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know it'd get this far." I didn't reply. She sniffled. "I saw the foundation website. I saw the pictures from the service. I didn't know you were doing all that." "You didn't ask," I said calmly. There was silence. The kind that comes when someone realizes they're too late. "I want to help now," she added quickly. "I want to make it right. Can we talk?" I looked out the window of my small office, the one tucked behind the new hospice wing we helped fund. Outside, a veteran I'd met last week was planting tomatoes with his grandniece. They were laughing, real full-bellied laughter, and I realized something in that moment. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't hers to reach. "No," I said gently, "because you don't fix abandonment with a phone call. You fix it by showing up." And you didn't. She didn't argue, just let out a soft breath like she'd been holding it for years. I hung up without hate, not because I forgave her, but because I had better things to carry. Behind me, a file waited. Another case. Another forgotten man. Another name no one had called in months. I turned to it and opened the folder. Because some people run from silence, I build in it. I visit Grandpa's grave on the first Sunday of every month. Always at dawn. Always with 2 cups of coffee, his black mine with cream set on the ground, like we're still having our morning ritual. I don't bring flowers. He hated how fast they died. Instead, I bring updates. I tell him about the veterans we've helped, men and women, forgotten by their families, lost in the shuffle of aging and paperwork. I tell him about the woman who hadn't been visited in 4 years, who now receives a letter every week from a volunteer. I tell him about the quiet ones who smile when someone remembers how they like their eggs. And I tell him about me, how I'm not angry anymore, how the grief no longer chokes, it teaches, how staying didn't mean staying bitter. People ask why I didn't give my family another chance, why I never returned their calls, why I let them sit in their silence. But I didn't let them do anything. They made their choice, and I made mine. Some legacies are built with gold and names engraved in stone. Others are built in hospital rooms at 2 a.m. with a hand held tight and the promise that no one dies thinking they don't matter. That's the legacy I carry. That's what he gave me. And as I sit in that chair beside his grave, wind curling through the trees, I feel no rage, no sadness, only clarity. I stayed. I remembered. And I rebuilt where others walked away. That to me is enough. They say a wedding day should be the happiest of your life. Mine began with a text message that read, "Wearing that uniform to your own wedding, disgraceful." I didn't flinch. I just looked down at the screen, then back at the doors in front of me. I was standing behind the chapel of St. Arclight Naval Base, gloved hands folded calmly over the hilt of my sword. White dress uniform pressed to perfection. 4 stars on my shoulder. A life sewn into seams no one else had to carry. My name is Admiral Rylan Voss, U.S. Navy. 26 years of service, 17 deployments, 36 commendations, and one father who never once said the words, "I'm proud of you." The message burned in my palm. I didn't delete it. I didn't need to. It wasn't the first time he tried to shame me into silence. But that day, when the chapel doors opened and 200 Navy SEALs rose in unison, the air trembled. A single voice called out "Admiral" on deck. They didn't stand for a bride. They stood for a life. And for the first time in years, I stood for myself. I was born on a base, raised in a house with corners sharp as my father's orders, and curtains that never stayed drawn long enough to feel like home. Fort Lancer, Colorado, half ice, half wind, and all discipline. My father, Colonel Wesley Braddock, was the kind of man who hung his medals beside the thermostat and expected his daughter to salute him every morning before school. He never said it out loud, but I knew I was the wrong shape for the mold he worshipped. He wanted a son. What he got was me. I was 10 when he first took me to an Army-Navy game. I remember the roar of the stadium, the smell of burnt peanuts, the way he stood tall and stone-faced in his pressed uniform. I wore a Navy hoodie with a small anchor stitched into the sleeve, bought it with my own allowance. He looked down once and said, "Don't wear what you can't earn." That was his version of a life lesson. He never hit me. He didn't need to. He had silence sharper than any belt. My mother, Elise, was the only softness in that house. A former high school teacher, she smelled like tea leaves and old books, and always had her sleeves rolled up like she was halfway between a fight and a hug. She called me her Firebird Wild, too loud, too intense. She slipped me poetry when my father wasn't looking. Sometimes I think that's the only reason I didn't break. I remember one dinner, like a crack in glass. I had just come home from a weekend leadership retreat, 12 years old, excited, tired, muddy from obstacle courses, and still glowing from earning top marks in every team task. I sat between them at the dinner table. My arms scratched my folder of certificates, folded neatly in my lap. My mom beamed when she saw them. My father, he didn't look up from his plate. "This nonsense teach you how to fold a proper uniform?" he asked, spearing a green bean. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it bled. I didn't cry that night. I never cried in front of him. At 14, I started waking at 4:45 every morning, timing myself through PT circuits I pulled from Marine forums online. I memorized every line in the Navy Code of Conduct before I turned 15. Not for school, for me. I applied to the Windermere Naval Academy in secret. I remember dropping the letter into the mailbox and thinking, if he finds it, I'll lie. I'll say it's for extra credit. But he never found it. When I got accepted, I ran home holding the envelope like a trophy. He was standing in the garage, polishing his old boots. I held it out. I got in. He didn't take it. Just stared for a long second and said, "So you're serious about this?" That was the last time we spoke for nearly 2 years. The first time I saluted a superior officer, my fingers trembled. It was the start of plebe summer at Windermere Naval Academy, and the air reeked of sweat rain and something more permanent expectation. I stood in a line of other candidates, most of them taller, broader male. Some came from military families with generations of brass in their blood. I came with silence in mine. My uniform was too stiff, my boots still squeaked. But my spine didn't bend. By week 2, the screaming stopped bothering me. What shook me were the moments between the noise when doubt had room to speak. "Go home, Voss," one of the drill instructors said after I fell during a tactical maneuver. "You've got the shoulders of a dancer, not a sailor." I didn't answer. But that night in my bunk, I recited every rank structure in the U.S. Navy until sleep found me. The only voice I ever wanted to hear after lights out came from my mother. She called every Sunday just after morning formation. Once during a particularly brutal week, I broke down on the phone. I was sitting in the hallway back against the cold wall, still in my camis. My hand was bleeding from a poorly timed wall climb. I told her everything, how I kept failing, how I didn't belong, how they all looked at me like I was a novelty in boots. She didn't cry. She never did. Instead, she said, "Steel doesn't come from ease, baby. It comes from fire. Let them underestimate you, it just gives you space to prove them wrong. Her voice held me up longer than my legs ever did, but she wasn't there for my first deployment. Okinawa 2 years after graduation. Logistics unit. Hot, humid, nothing glamorous. Most men didn't speak to me directly unless they had to. But I paid attention. I fixed problems before they turned into paperwork. I made allies quietly through competence, not volume. Then came Somalia. I wasn't supposed to be boots on the ground. But when our recon team went dark during a coastal supply op, I didn't hesitate. I joined the extraction crew without waiting for clearance. It was chaos gunfire cutting through rusted shipping containers, one of our guys screaming, leg-shredded blood soaking the sand. I dragged him 40 yards under fire, my uniform-shredded tourniquet in one hand, radio in the other. He lived. They called me Iceback after that, said I bled cold. But I wasn't proud of the nickname. I was proud of the Christmas card that showed up every year after. Same handwriting always signed from Jason Avery. Avery's daughter was named after me. That was the moment command took notice. But not my father. I sent him a photo of the commendation. No reply. I started rising through the ranks anyway, one briefing, one mission, one breath at a time. Not for him. For the ones who didn't survive long enough to send cards, I didn't know she was dying until the 3rd round of chemo had already failed. The message came from a neighbor, not my father. A voicemail shaky and rushed, saying my mother had been moved into hospice care 2 days prior. I was stationed in Bahrain at the time, coordinating security protocols for naval shipping lanes. The next morning, I was on a transport home. By the time I got to the hospital, her hair was gone, and her skin was translucent under the fluorescent light. Her breath came in shallow sighs. My father stood in the corner, arms crossed, as if he'd been carved out of the wall. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word. She opened her eyes for just a moment when I took her hand. "You came," she whispered, the corners of her mouth lifting. "I'm here, Mama. I'm right here." Her fingers closed around mine, frail but certain. "Keep flying," she said. That was the last thing she ever told me. After the funeral, I returned to base. There was no call from my father, no letter, just an email that arrived 3 days later. 3 sentences. The service was fine. I hope the Navy's treating you well. I still don't understand your decision. That was it. I stopped expecting anything after that. But something in me still clung to the idea of being seen. Each time I was promoted, I sent him a note. Short formal, a photo, a link to the ceremony. I never heard back. Not even when I received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Not even when I made Rear Admiral youngest woman in my division to do so. The silence became a second uniform. I wore it well, but it never fit right. Then one day, an old Army buddy of his approached me at a security symposium in D.C., glass of bourbon in hand, soft smirk playing on his lips. "Frank says the Navy's gone soft, promoting women now." I didn't respond, but he added, lowering his voice slightly, "He keeps your photo in his office. Never admits it, but it's there." I smiled, thin and brittle. Love and silence still felt like absence. So I built other kinds of connections. I built legacy. I rewrote training programs at Coronado, implemented safety protocols that cut injury rates in half. Quiet reforms, no speeches, no headlines. But the men followed. They called me ma'am like it meant something. And when I walked into a room, they stood not because of tradition, but because I had led them through fire and never once let them burn alone. But every win still carried a quiet question. Would she have been proud? Would he have looked up even once? By the time the promotion to full admiral came, I was alone on the deck of a carrier watching the sun rise over the water. No brass band, no family, just a message from Personnel Command and the reflection of 4 stars in the steel. A few days later, I received a letter. Handwritten, no return address. 5 words. "They're just making you a symbol." His handwriting. After 15 years, I didn't reply. I burned the letter in the sink. James never served a day in uniform, but he understood structure better than most officers I'd met. We collided at a Department of Defense roundtable. He was civilian intelligence, sharp quiet, frustratingly meticulous. I was overseeing joint operations, cybersecurity, already tired of being the only woman at the table who outranked the rest. He challenged one of my reporting formats in front of a dozen analysts. I shut him down in 3 sentences. The next morning, he sent me an updated draft. "You were right," he wrote. "Clarity wins." That was how it started. He never asked me to be softer, never shrank when I was sharp. He knew the weight of classified missions, of sudden deployments, of silences I couldn't break. He once told me, "You in uniform is the most honest thing I've ever seen. Don't ever wear anything else, just to make people comfortable." He proposed on a pier in Virginia Beach. No cameras, no crowd. Just boots dangling over the water, his fingers steady around a simple ring. "Let me serve beside you, wherever that means." I said yes without blinking. We didn't want a grand wedding, just something quiet. True. We chose St. Arclight Chapel, the one on base where I'd stood for too many funerals. It felt fitting to mark a beginning in the same place I'd honored so many endings. He would wear a navy blue suit. I'd wear my whites. Not a statement, just who I was. A week before the ceremony, I sent my father a card. Not out of hope, out of habit. Saturday, 1300 hours. Naval Chapel. I'll be in uniform. You're welcome to attend. He didn't respond. The night before the wedding, James stayed with his best friend. I stayed in the guest quarters on base, ironing my uniform until the brass gleamed. When I ran the iron over my shoulder, board's 4 stars set in gold, I felt my throat tighten. I'd worn those stars in combat, in strategy briefings, in moments of life and death. Now I would wear them for love. The morning arrived bright and cold. Spring light slanted over the barracks and painted the base in quiet steel and promise. I stood outside the chapel 15 minutes before the ceremony, flanked by 2 men I had once pulled out of live fire. Chief Marcus Holt, who lost 3 fingers in Kandahar, but still saluted with perfect form. And Torres Senior Chief, who now walked with a steel leg, but outran every 20-year-old in his unit. They didn't ask to be there. They insisted. "You walked us through hell," Marcus said quietly. "Let us walk you toward something better." I nodded. I was ready. Until the phone in my pocket buzzed. No name. Just a number I hadn't saved in years. "You're wearing a uniform to your wedding, disgraceful." No punctuation, no blessing, no apology. Just a final shot from a man still trying to command from a distance. I didn't flinch. I just smoothed my cuffs, straightened my spine, and said, "Let's go." The chapel doors opened with a slow, deliberate creak, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my boots striking the polished floor. 1, 2. Then silence cracked like thunder. "Admiral on deck." The voice rang out firm, full-chested, a command, a tribute, a memory, and 200 SEALs rose in unison. Rows of decorated men and women I had led through operations in rainfire, and blood stood taller than any stained glass window behind them. They didn't move because they were told. They moved because they chose to. Not for a bride. For me. I didn't look left or right. I didn't scan the pews for one absent face. I kept walking. My boots tapped steady rhythms, not rushed, not timid, just certain. Torres walked on my right, Marcus on my left. Their hands never left their sides. Their pace matched mine, like they were moving toward battle. But we weren't walking into fire. We were walking into peace. James stood at the altar, back straight eyes, shimmering hands folded behind him, just like he knew I preferred. He didn't cry. He didn't look overwhelmed. He looked ready, like a man who knew exactly what he was marrying into, and did it anyway. As I stepped beside him, the chapel returned to silence. No violins, no fanfare. Just the breath between 2 lives converging. The chaplain, an old friend from my Bahrain deployment, opened his binder, but didn't speak yet. There was reverence in the air, thicker than formality, heavier than ritual. James leaned toward me and whispered, "I don't need vows to know I'm already married to your courage." I didn't answer. I just took his hand. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't commanding a room. I was being honored by it. After the ceremony, the reception was simple. No chandeliers, no polished speeches, just a mess hall on base strung with soft lights and quiet laughter. I barely touched my food. I didn't need to. I was full in a way no plate could satisfy. Later that night, I stepped outside to catch a breath beneath the cooling dusk. The sky stretched wide and clean above the barracks. James joined me, sliding his hand into mine without a word. He asked gently, "Did you hear from him?" I nodded. He waited. "He called it disgraceful," I said. James looked out over the lot, where seals still lingered in small clusters, suits, loosened metals catching the last slivers of light. "Do you believe that I didn't answer right away?" Instead, I looked down at my uniform, my ribbons, the 4 stars pressed to my shoulder. Then I looked back toward the chapel, where just hours earlier 200 warriors had risen without command. "No," I said quietly, "I don't. There are gifts a parent is supposed to give freely, blessing pride presents. Mine gave me silence and judgment. But that day in that chapel, I received a different kind of inheritance. Respect. The kind you don't inherit. The kind you earn when no one is watching." 3 days into our honeymoon, tucked away in a quiet coastal inn in Oregon, James handed me my phone. "You should see this," he said gently. It was a photo from my cousin Emma, shot from across the street. Faint, a little grainy, but there he was. My father, full dress uniform, arms folded, back straight, standing alone in the corner of the chapel parking lot, watching. A second photo followed. He was turning away. He came, but he didn't enter. Couldn't sit among 200 warriors who had stood for me when he never could. James stood beside me, his thumb brushing mine. Then quietly, he came, but he still couldn't stand. It didn't sting like it used to. Not anymore. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name across the envelope in his blocky handwriting. Inside were 5 lines. I didn't enter the chapel because I didn't know how to sit beside people who saw in you what I refused to. I didn't salute, not because you didn't deserve it, but because I forgot how. I was wrong. If you'll allow it, I'd like to talk. No rank, no protocol, just a father finally trying. It was the first real thing he'd said in years. We met at Arlington, my mother's grave. The grass trimmed the silence deeper than memory. He wore a blazer and slacks, civilian, no badges, no pretense. I wore my uniform, not to prove anything, just because it was me. We talked about her, about regrets, about the years we let turn cold. Before we parted, he stepped back, stiff, awkward, and raised his hand in a slow, imperfect salute. Not precise, but true. And I returned it not for who he'd been, but for who he was finally trying to be. 1 year to the day after my wedding, I stood on a stage accepting the Department of Defense's Excellence in Ethical Command Award. Rows of cadets in white rose to their feet as I stepped to the podium. So did he. In the back corner, hand to brow, some people think power is revenge, that rising means proving them wrong so loudly they can't ignore you. But I've learned something different. Real power is quieter. It's the kind you build slowly, honestly, until one day even those who doubted you must stand. Some salutes come too late for applause, but not too late for meaning.